Welcome to Inside American Politics, where we dive deep into the pivotal moments that shaped our world. I'm your host, Bradley Teller, and today we're stepping back into 1955 Montgomery, Alabama, a city where the simple act of refusing to give up a bus seat would ignite one of the most powerful civil rights movements in American history. This is the untold story of the Montgomery Bus Boycott, not just Rosa Parks' heroic moment, but the complex web of individuals, decisions, and circumstances that turned a single act of defiance into a 381-day revolution. To understand the Montgomery Bus Boycott, we must first understand the enemy, and that enemy had a name: James F. Blake. Blake wasn't just any bus driver. He was the embodiment of a system designed to humiliate, degrade, and dehumanize African Americans every single day. Picture this. You're an African American in 1955 Montgomery. You need to get to work, to the store, to visit family. But taking the bus isn't just transportation. It's a daily dose of systematic humiliation. The city buses had 36 seats, but these weren't just seats. They were instruments of oppression. The first 10 seats, reserved exclusively for white passengers, regardless of whether anyone was sitting in them. Even if the bus was packed with black passengers standing in the aisles, those front 10 seats remained empty, like a throne room for white supremacy. The last 10 seats were supposedly for black passengers, marked by a movable barrier. But here's where it gets truly insidious. Those middle 16 seats? They were at the complete discretion of drivers like James Blake. These men, often armed and granted police powers, could move that barrier at will. If more white passengers boarded and the front section was full, Blake could push that barrier back, forcing seated black passengers to give up their seats and move further back. But the humiliation didn't stop there. The most degrading rule required black passengers to enter through the front door to pay their fare, because the system needed their money. But then they had to get off and re-enter through the back door. Some drivers, finding sadistic pleasure in their power, would drive away before African American passengers could reboard, leaving them stranded on the street, their fare stolen, their dignity trampled. It was during Rosa Parks' second attempt at registering to vote that she first encountered James Blake's particular brand of cruelty. The irony is striking: a woman trying to exercise her democratic right to vote being subjected to the very system that sought to deny her basic human dignity. That day, the back of Blake's bus was packed with black passengers, including the stairwell area. Rosa paid her fare at the front and walked through the white section to stand in the crowded rear. But Blake wasn't satisfied. Under his menacing stare, he demanded she get off and re-enter through the back door, even though she was already in the back of the bus. Rosa Parks, pragmatic and already where she needed to be, refused. She found no logical reason to comply with this absurd demand. Blake escalated, threatening her, ordering her to exit his bus if she wouldn't obey. When Rosa stood her ground, Blake resorted to physical force, grabbing her coat and forcibly moving her forward. In the struggle near the front, Rosa's purse slipped from her grasp. But instead of bending over submissively to retrieve it, she did something that must have shocked Blake to his core. She defiantly sat in the front seat to pick it up. Blake appeared furious, seeming on the verge of violence, but he didn't strike her. Rosa Parks didn't comply with his demand to reboard through the rear door. From that moment forward, she made it a point to check the driver's identity before stepping onto a bus. She was avoiding James Blake, but fate had other plans. In the passage of time, Rosa Parks would cross paths with James Blake once more, and that encounter would change the world. December 1st, 1955. It was just another Thursday evening in Montgomery, but by the end of that day, the trajectory of American civil rights would be forever altered. Rosa Parks finished her work at Montgomery Fair Department Store and boarded the Cleveland Avenue bus, and there behind the wheel sat James F. Blake, the same driver who had humiliated her years earlier. Parks took a seat in the first row of the colored section. She was following the law, sitting exactly where she was supposed to sit. But as the bus filled up and more white passengers boarded, Blake made his move. He needed Parks' row to accommodate white passengers, and he expected the same compliance he'd always received. "Give me those seats," Blake demanded. The other black passengers in the row complied, moving to the back. But Rosa Parks remained seated. When Blake asked if she was going to stand up, her response was simple, clear, and revolutionary. No. Blake's reaction was swift and predictable. He left the bus to make a phone call, undoubtedly to the police. When he returned, he stood silently at the front of the bus, waiting. Within minutes, 2 police officers arrived and entered the bus. Blake pointed toward Mrs. Parks, explaining his need for her seat and mentioning that other passengers had complied with his demands. The officers approached Parks and inquired about her refusal to give up her seat. When she confirmed that she had indeed refused, they arrested her on the spot. They confiscated her belongings and escorted her from the bus to their patrol car. Blake, seething with the authority granted to him by a racist system, confirmed his desire to press charges under the local bus segregation law. Rosa Parks was taken first to police headquarters, then to the city jail. Even there, the indignities continued. Despite intense thirst, she was forbidden from drinking from the nearby water fountain because it was reserved for whites only. But here's what makes Rosa Parks's case so significant. It wasn't just her courage in that moment, though that was extraordinary. It was who Rosa Parks was, and the network of relationships and activism that surrounded her. She wasn't just a tired seamstress, as history sometimes portrays her. She was a seasoned activist, a woman who had been working with the NAACP since 1943, someone with the character and connections necessary to transform a moment of personal resistance into a movement that would shake the foundations of segregation. News of Parks' arrest spread quickly through Montgomery's black community, even before she made her phone call home. A fellow passenger had witnessed the arrest and immediately contacted Mrs. Bertha Butler, who promptly informed E.D. Nixon, a prominent black activist and former president of the local NAACP chapter. The wheels of resistance began turning immediately. Nixon tried calling the police station to inquire about the charges, but was brusquely dismissed. Undeterred, he contacted white lawyer Clifford Durr, who was able to obtain the details and relay them back to Nixon. This network of black and white allies, Nixon, the Durrs, and soon Fred Gray, the city's main black lawyer, represented years of relationship building and organizing that would prove crucial in the days ahead. By evening, Nixon, Clifford Durr, and his wife Virginia had gone to the city jail to secure Parks' release with a $100 bond. During their journey to the jail, they discussed something that would prove prophetic, the possibility of using Parks's case as a test case to challenge segregation itself. They knew Rosa Parks' character. They understood her strength and her newfound confidence after attending an interracial conference. They recognized that this wasn't just another arrest. This was an opportunity that the movement had been waiting for. While the machinery of resistance was already in motion outside, Rosa Parks was enduring her own personal ordeal within the walls of the Montgomery City Jail. What happened to her during those hours of imprisonment reveals not just the personal cost of her courage, but also the human connections that sustained the movement even in its darkest moments. After her arrest, Parks faced the degrading process of being booked into the system. City prosecutors, not content with simple city ordinance violations, chose to upgrade the charges to violations of Alabama state segregation laws, a more severe infraction that carried heavier penalties. This wasn't just bureaucracy, it was a deliberate escalation designed to make an example of her. The booking procedure was deliberately humiliating. Her fingerprints were taken roughly. She later recounted the pain she felt as her fingernails were manipulated for the prints. Mugshots were snapped, capturing not just her image but attempting to document her as a criminal. These photographs, meant to shame and dehumanize, would ironically become symbols of dignity and resistance. Initially placed alone in a cell, Parks's isolation was short-lived. A white matron soon moved her to a cell with 2 other women, ostensibly to reduce her loneliness. This decision reveals something important about the assumptions of the system. They expected her to be afraid, to be grateful for any small kindness, to be broken by the experience. But Rosa Parks wasn't broken. Instead, she became a source of comfort and connection for her fellow prisoners. While one cellmate kept her distance, the other opened up to Parks, sharing a harrowing tale of self-defense. This woman had attacked her boyfriend with an axe to protect herself from his aggression. a story that sparked Parks' sympathy and her immediate desire to help. This moment is profound when you think about it. Here was Rosa Parks, arrested for challenging one of the most entrenched systems of oppression in America, sitting in a jail cell and immediately focusing on how she could help another woman in distress. Her activism wasn't just political, it was deeply personal and human. Their conversation was interrupted by the matron, but not before Parks learned something crucial about the inequities of the system. Her cellmate confided that she hadn't been permitted any communication since her arrest, highlighting how Parks' eventual access to a phone was itself a kind of privilege, perhaps due to the attention her case was already receiving. When Parks was finally granted permission to make a phone call, even this basic right came with restrictions. She had to indicate in writing who she wanted to call, and the call was made under the watchful eye of the matron, using a dime provided by the jail. Privacy, even in communication with family, was another dignity stripped away. Her call to her mother revealed the emotional strength that would sustain the movement. Her mother's first concern was whether she had been physically harmed, a question that speaks to the very real fear of police brutality that haunted the Black community. Parks reassured her mother while explaining her situation, then spoke to her husband Ray, who immediately set out to help her. Ray Parks didn't have a car, so his journey to the police station would take time. But already the community network was activating. A friend who had heard about Parks's arrest stopped by to offer Ray a ride. This seemingly small gesture represents something larger, a community that was ready to mobilize, to support one another, to turn individual acts of courage into collective resistance. Back in her cell, Parks resumed her conversation with her cellmate, who provided her with phone numbers for her brothers and asked Parks to contact them. This woman had been denied communication, but she trusted Parks to be her connection to the outside world. When the matron came to escort Parks away before she could exchange contact information, the woman made a desperate gesture. She threw the scrap of paper containing her brother's phone numbers into the hallway. By chance, it landed right in front of Parks, who discreetly slipped it into her pocket. This small piece of paper represents something beautiful, human connection transcending the barriers that the system tried to erect. Even in jail, even under surveillance, people found ways to care for one another, to maintain bonds that no law could break. By the time Parks was released on bond, the movement was already underway. But her experience in that jail cell, the dignity she maintained, the connections she made, the strength she showed, had prepared her for what was to come. She had faced the system's attempts to break her spirit and emerged not just unbroken, but more determined than ever. While Rosa Parks was enduring her night in jail, another remarkable woman was refusing to sleep. Joanne Robinson, president of the Women's Political Council, was about to turn her organization into the engine of the Montgomery Bus Boycott. Her story reveals how movements don't just happen. They're made by people who are prepared to act when the moment comes. Robinson later described a sense of paralysis that had gripped Montgomery's Black community as news of Parks' arrest spread. There was fear, discontent, and uncertainty everywhere. People were waiting for someone to do something, but everyone remained inactive. That paralysis ended with Robinson's decision to act. But Robinson's mobilization wasn't spontaneous. It was the culmination of years of preparation and frustration. She had her own history with Montgomery's bus system, having faced similar racial discrimination that led her to believe the Women's Political Council should focus intensively on the bus situation. For years, the WPC had voiced complaints about the mistreatment of Black passengers to the Montgomery City Lines and city commissioners, only to be consistently dismissed and ignored. The dismissal of their concerns had reached a breaking point after the landmark Brown v. Board of Education decision. Robinson had sent a firm declaration to Montgomery Mayor W.A. Gale, warning that continued mistreatment would lead to a boycott. The mayor had ignored this warning. Now, with Rosa Parks' arrest, the time for warnings had passed. E.D. Nixon contacted Robinson that evening to discuss Parks' arrest, and Robinson immediately notified the WPC's leadership. They were determined not to repeat their previous missed opportunity during Claudette Colvin's case earlier that year, when a teenager's arrest for refusing to give up her bus seat hadn't resulted in sustained action, partly due to concerns about Colvin's age and circumstances. Robinson made a crucial decision that night. They would organize a one-day boycott for the Monday of Mrs. Parks's court appearance. But she also made a controversial choice. She decided not to inform Rosa Parks of this decision. Robinson reportedly wrote on an envelope that the WPC would not wait for Mrs. Parks' consent to call the boycott. This decision reveals some of the class tensions within Montgomery's black community. Despite having collaborated previously, Robinson and Parks moved in very different social circles. Robinson, a college professor, may not have been fully aware of Parks's extensive history in political activism, seeing her perhaps as a victim rather than as a fellow organizer. This assumption would prove incorrect. Parks was anything but a passive victim. What happened next was nothing short of extraordinary. Despite the risks associated with being a black woman venturing out late at night in 1955 Montgomery, Robinson journeyed to Alabama State College. With help from 2 students and a colleague who provided access to a mimeograph machine, Robinson spent the entire night producing leaflets to announce the boycott. Working efficiently, printing 3 leaflets to a page to meet their extensive needs, they produced thousands of copies of a message that would electrify the community. The leaflet's language was carefully crafted. Another Negro woman has been arrested and thrown into jail because she refused to get up out of her seat on the bus for a white person to sit down. It warned that unless action was taken, such arrests would continue to happen to their daughters, mothers, and themselves. The leaflet strategically emphasized the economic power of the black community, noting that they were the primary users of the buses. It highlighted the mistreatment of African American women, perhaps calculating that this would strengthen the community's resolve to act. The message was clear. This was the second such arrest since Claudette Colvin's case, and the next victim could be anyone. By 3 a.m., Robinson contacted E.D. Nixon to update him on their plan. By dawn, between 4 and 7 a.m., Robinson and her students had devised distribution routes and were joined by nearly 20 women who helped ensure that virtually every black resident in Montgomery learned about the planned boycott. The scope of their operation was remarkable. Over the following days, they managed to distribute more than 35,000 leaflets across the city, reaching barbershops, stores, bars, factories, and churches. The epicenter of distribution was the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, where ministers were scheduled to convene on Friday night. But Robinson's activism came at a cost. When she returned to her teaching duties that morning, she was summoned to meet with Alabama State's president, who was furious about the leaflets and the involvement of college resources. President Trenholm expressed his anger visibly, concerned about potential repercussions for the institution. Despite being exhausted and worried about losing her job, Robinson stood her ground. She laid out her reasoning, discussing the repetitive nature of racial injustices affecting children, men, and women of all ages, who were forced to give up their seats to white passengers. Her passionate explanation gradually softened Trenholm's stance, though Robinson promised to keep Alabama State officially out of the activities and took personal responsibility for covering the costs of the leaflets. This confrontation reveals the courage required not just from Rosa Parks, but from all the women who made the boycott possible. Robinson risked her career, her livelihood, her safety, all for the chance that this time, finally, the community would stand together and demand change. Her midnight mobilization had created the infrastructure for a movement. Now all they needed was for the community to respond. Before we conclude our journey through the Montgomery Bus Boycott's origins, we must address one of the most compelling and controversial questions surrounding Rosa Parks' decision. Was she thinking of Emmett Till when she refused to give up her seat? The story has become part of civil rights folklore that Parks was motivated by the brutal murder of 14-year-old Emmett Till in Mississippi just months before her arrest. It's a narrative that connects 2 pivotal moments in civil rights history, linking the horrific lynching of a child to the dignified resistance of a woman who helped launch a movement. But the truth, as is often the case with historical narratives, is more complex than the folklore suggests. Emmett Till had been murdered in August 1955, just 4 months before Rosa Parks' arrest. The Chicago teenager had been visiting relatives in Mississippi when he allegedly whistled at a white woman, Carolyn Bryant. Her husband, Roy Bryant, and his half-brother, J.W. Milam, kidnapped, tortured, and murdered the boy, dumping his body in the Tallahatchie River. When Till's body was recovered, his mother, Mamie Till Mobley, made the courageous decision to have an open-casket funeral, forcing America to confront the reality of racial violence. The murder and the subsequent acquittal of Bryant and Milam by an all-white jury had sent shockwaves through Black America. The image of Till's mutilated face, published in Jet magazine and newspapers across the country, became a symbol of the brutality that the Jim Crow system was willing to inflict to maintain white supremacy. So when the story emerged that Rosa Parks was thinking of Emmett Till during her moment of resistance, it resonated powerfully. It created a direct emotional and moral connection between Till's murder and Parks' courage, suggesting that the boy's death had not been in vain, that it had inspired the very act that would help bring down segregation. The connection seemed even more credible when we learned that just 4 days before the bus boycott began, Parks attended a service at Martin Luther King Jr.'s Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. There, Dr. T.R.M. Howard, a key figure in the Till trial and Delta racial politics, recounted the story of Till's murder to Montgomery's black community. His account focused on the trial in Tallahatchie County, bringing the horror and injustice of Till's case directly to the people who would soon launch the boycott. Historians David T. Beto, Linda Royster Beto, and Jerome Little inferred from this timing that Till's murder played a significant role in Parks' thought process at the time of her arrest. The circumstantial evidence seemed compelling. Parks had heard Till's story just days before her arrest, and the emotional impact of that story could well have strengthened her resolve when Blake demanded she give up her seat. But here's where the story becomes complicated. Despite the powerful narrative appeal, there is no documented evidence in Parks' own writings to confirm that she was thinking of Till during her act of resistance. The earliest known reference to this connection appears in Jesse Jackson's 2003 introduction to Mamie Till Mobley's book, Death of Innocence. Jackson, who also mentioned the connection at Parks' funeral in 2005, claimed that Parks had told him personally that thinking of Emmett Till had strengthened her decision to refuse to give up her seat. David Jordan, a longtime Mississippi politician and civil rights figure, also claimed in 2014 that Parks had privately expressed to him the significance of Till's murder in her decision. These testimonies from respected civil rights leaders lend some credibility to the story. Both Jackson and Jordan were in positions to have had personal conversations with Parks, and their independent recollections suggest that Parks may indeed have made such statements to them privately. However, as historian Devery Anderson pointed out, these remain second-hand statements, memories of private conversations rather than documented historical evidence. The claim that Parks was thinking of Till during her moment of defiance rests entirely on these personal recollections, however credible the sources. The uncertainty became significant enough that in September 2017, the quotation was removed from the Mississippi Freedom Trail marker in front of Bryant's Grocery and Meat Market, the site where Till's ordeal began. Alan Hammonds, whose company oversees the Mississippi Trail initiatives, concluded that there wasn't enough historical evidence to justify including the Parks quotation on the sign. This controversy reveals something important about how historical narratives are constructed and how they evolve. The connection between Till's murder and Parks' resistance is emotionally and morally compelling. It creates a clear line from tragedy to triumph, from victim to victor. It suggests that Till's death inspired the action that helped launch the civil rights movement. But whether Parks was consciously thinking of Till or not, the broader historical connection remains significant. Till's murder had indeed electrified Black America, creating a context of urgency and moral clarity that surrounded events like Parks' arrest. The horror of what happened to Till, a child murdered for the smallest perceived breach of racial etiquette, certainly informed the atmosphere in which Parks made her decision. Perhaps the question of whether Parks was explicitly thinking of Till is less important than the reality that Till's murder and Parks' resistance were both part of the same historical moment, a moment when Black Americans were increasingly unwilling to accept the brutality and humiliation of Jim Crow segregation. Till's murder showed the deadly consequences of challenging white supremacy. Parks's resistance showed that the challenge would continue regardless of those consequences. Together, they represent the tragedy and the hope that defined the civil rights movement's emergence. The Montgomery Bus Boycott began with acts of courage, Rosa Parks refusing her seat, Joanne Robinson printing leaflets through the night, E.D. Nixon risking everything to support justice. But its success came from transforming individual bravery into collective power. What really happened behind the scenes? Who made the tough choices that turned a single protest into a year-long movement that shook a nation? The full story reveals secrets, strategies, and struggles that history textbooks often overlook. Download the Skoob app now to get access to the complete story, uncover hidden details, and see how ordinary people challenged an unjust system and won. History isn't just in the past, it's being made with every choice we make. Remember, courage can start with one act, but change demands all of us.